Daniel's breath caught. The PowerPoint slide showing projected profits blurred as his ex-wife took her seat at the head of the table. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but he could see the fire in her brown eyes. The same fire he'd once tried to extinguish by calling her dreams too small. Have you ever had someone doubt your potential, only to prove them spectacularly wrong? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The boardroom fell silent when she walked in. Not because she was beautiful, but because the man who once called her just a nurse suddenly realized he was looking at his judge, jury, and executioner. Have you ever seen someone you destroyed, thriving? Have you ever wondered what happens to the people we leave behind? What if the person you underestimated became your biggest obstacle? Stay with me to see if karma has a medical degree. Daniel Carter adjusted his designer tie and cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. The mahogany table stretched like a battlefield between Houston's most powerful investors, their tailored suits and calculating eyes focused on his presentation. Chrome and glass reflected his nervous energy back at him, until the door opened and time stopped. She wore confidence like expensive perfume, her white coat pristine over a navy dress that hugged curves he remembered tracing in darkness. Dr. Ava Thompson stepped into the room with the kind of presence that made billion-dollar deals pause mid-sentence. "Gentlemen, ladies," the hospital chairman announced, "I'd like you to meet our new chief of surgery, Dr. Thompson." Daniel's breath caught. The PowerPoint slide showing projected profits blurred as his ex-wife took her seat at the head of the table. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but he could see the fire in her brown eyes. The same fire he'd once tried to extinguish by calling her dreams too small. "Mr. Carter," Ava's voice cut through his shock like a scalpel, "please continue your presentation about how your medical software will revolutionize our surgical procedures." The way she said, "you" made it clear she wasn't impressed. Daniel fumbled with his remote, decades of boardroom confidence crumbling under the gaze of the woman whose heart he'd broken 5 years ago. His software demonstration flickered to life. Graphs, statistics, promises of efficiency. But every word felt hollow when directed at someone who actually saved lives while he just sold technology to make it easier. The integration process, he managed, voice steadier than he felt, will increase surgical precision by 30% while reducing operation time by. How does it perform during power fluctuations? Ava interrupted, pen tapping against her notepad. Or when servers crash during a code blue situation? Daniel swallowed hard. She wasn't making conversation. She was testing him, and they both knew it. Around the table, investors leaned forward, suddenly more interested in her medical expertise than his flashy promises. "The backup systems are state-of-the-art," he replied, but Ava's slight smile suggested she knew something he didn't. Heat crept up his neck as memories flooded back. Late nights when she'd quiz him about his projects, always asking the practical questions he hadn't considered. She'd made him better then. Now she was making him sweat. Their eyes met across the polished wood, and for a heartbeat, the room disappeared. He saw past her professional mask to the woman who used to trace his chest in the early morning light, who'd believe in his dreams before he learned to dismiss hers. But this wasn't the same woman. This Ava held herself like she owned the world instead of apologizing for taking up space in it. This Ava made other people wait for her approval. "The contract looks comprehensive," she said finally, closing the folder. "We'll need some modifications to the oversight clauses, but I think we can make this work." Daniel blinked. "You're approving it?" "I'm approving working with cutting-edge technology that could save lives," she corrected. "Whether that includes working with you remains to be seen. Have you ever had someone doubt your potential, only to prove them spectacularly wrong? Drop your comeback stories below." The meeting wrapped with handshakes and scheduling discussions, but Daniel barely heard the details. As investors filed out, praising Dr. Thompson's thorough questions and impressive credentials, he remained frozen in his chair. Harvard Medical School, chief of surgery, board certifications that would make most doctors weep with envy. When had she accomplished all this? How had he never known? As Ava took her seat at the head of the table, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: fear. Because the contract worth millions wasn't just business anymore. It was personal, and she held all the cards. She'd practiced this moment in mirrors during residency, staying calm when facing the man who shattered her dreams. What she hadn't prepared for was how her body still remembered his touch. Ava's hands trembled slightly as she signed the preliminary agreements, muscle memory betraying her professional composure. 5 years of medical training, countless life-or-death decisions, and still Daniel Carter could make her pulse quicken with nothing more than his presence. Their old apartment in Houston's medical district had been cramped but filled with love. Takeout containers on textbooks, her scrubs draped over his laptop bag, dreams tangled together in a bed too small for their ambitions. Back then, she'd rush home from 12-hour shifts to find him coding on the couch, and he'd pull her close, kissing away the smell of antiseptic and exhaustion. "You're going to change the world," he'd whisper against her neck, hands roaming over her uniform. "My brilliant nurse." But brilliant wasn't enough when his tech company started growing. When his friends, Marcus Webb and his country club crowd, started making comments about Daniel's ambitious girlfriend who just worked at a hospital. She remembered the exact moment everything shifted. They were at Marcus's house party, surrounded by tech entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, when someone asked what she did for a living. "Ava's a nurse," Daniel had said, and something in his tone made her stomach drop. Not pride, not love, embarrassment. "How noble," Marcus had replied with a smirk. "Very practical." The other wives in the circle were fashion designers, art gallery owners, successful bloggers with 6-figure social media followings. Women who enhanced their husbands' images instead of working night shifts, saving strangers' lives. That night, in their tiny bedroom, Ava had tried to talk about applying to medical school. She'd been saving money, studying for the MCAT, dreaming of becoming a surgeon since high school. "You're better than this, Ava," Daniel had said, not looking up from his laptop. "You're smart enough to be more than just." "More than what, Daniel? More than someone who saves lives? More than enough for you." The fight that followed had been vicious, but the silence afterward had been worse. Daniel sleeping on the couch, avoiding her eyes during coffee, taking phone calls in another room. The distance growing until she felt like a stranger in her own relationship. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday. She'd been working a double shift and came home to find them on the kitchen counter with a note. "You deserve someone who appreciates what you want to become. I'm not that person anymore." Coward. He couldn't even face her to end it. Back in the boardroom, Daniel's presentation continued, but Ava wasn't listening to his words. She was watching his hands, the same hands that once traced her spine while she fell asleep, now gesturing desperately as he pitched technology to save lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. He wanted credit for healing while she'd actually learned to do it. His wedding ring was gone, she noticed. Good. At least he hadn't moved on immediately to someone more suitable for his lifestyle. "Dr. Thompson?" The chairman's voice pulled her back to the present. "Any final questions about the implementation timeline?" Ava looked directly at Daniel, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Nervousness? Regret? Or just the fear of a businessman whose deal hung in the balance? "Just one," she said, voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Will Mr. Carter be overseeing the installation personally? I want to ensure we have direct access to the decision-maker if issues arise." Daniel's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "Of course. Whatever you need. Have you ever been made to feel small for doing something noble? Tell me about a time someone made you question your worth." The meeting ended with professional pleasantries, but Ava felt Daniel's eyes on her as she gathered her files. 5 years ago, she would have looked back, would have sought his approval like she always had. Today, she walked out without a glance, heels clicking confidently on marble floors. But she could feel his stare burning between her shoulder blades, and despite everything, despite the pain, the betrayal, the years of rebuilding herself, her body still responded to his attention like a flower turning toward sunlight. Back in the boardroom, Daniel's presentation continued, but Ava wasn't listening to his words. She was watching his hands, the same hands that once traced her spine, now gesturing desperately as he pitched technology to save lives while she'd actually learned to do it. She could have rejected his contract with one word. Instead, she did something that would torment him far more. She said yes. The contract signing took place in Ava's office 3 days later, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Houston's skyline like a throne room view. Her diploma hung behind her desk. Harvard Medical, chief surgery resident, board certifications, a wall of achievements he'd never bothered to imagine for her. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early, but she kept him waiting. Power move or genuine emergency? He couldn't tell anymore. The Ava he'd known had been punctual to a fault, always worried about inconveniencing others. This woman clearly had no such concerns. When she finally entered, she brought the scent of expensive coffee and that new perfume, something French and confident that made his mouth go dry. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders today, softening the sharp edges of her business suit, but doing nothing to diminish the authority in her stride. "Mr. Carter," she said, settling behind her desk like a queen taking her throne. "I trust you've reviewed our modifications to the original agreement." Daniel opened the folder, scanning clauses that hadn't been there before. Personal oversight requirements, daily progress reports, his physical presence required during installation and testing phases. She was essentially demanding he work under her direct supervision. "These terms are quite specific," he managed. "I believe in accountability." Ava leaned back in her chair, studying him with dark eyes that missed nothing. "Your technology will be integrated into our most critical procedures. I need to know that if something goes wrong, the person responsible is immediately available." She was talking about the software, but they both heard the subtext. He'd run away once when things got difficult. She wasn't giving him that option again. "Of course," he said, though his chest tightened to the thought of working in close proximity to her for weeks. "Whatever you require." Their fingers brushed as he handed back the signed contract, and electricity shot up his arm. Ava's breath caught almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly, sliding the documents into her desk drawer with practiced efficiency. "The installation begins Monday," she said. 7 a.m. sharp. "Our surgical schedule doesn't accommodate late starts or technical difficulties." Daniel nodded, knowing he was agreeing to far more than a business arrangement. This was going to be torture, being near her every day, watching her command respect from people who treated her like the brilliant woman he'd been too insecure to appreciate. "Dr. Thompson," he started, then stopped. What could he say? That he'd been an idiot? That seeing her success made him proud and ashamed in equal measure? That the past 5 years felt like a waste because he'd thrown away the best thing in his life? Yes. She waited, pen poised over her appointment calendar. "Nothing. I'll see you Monday." As he stood to leave, Ava's voice stopped him at the door. "Daniel." He turned, hope fluttering stupidly in his chest. "Don't make me regret this decision." The words hit like a physical blow, but not because they were cruel, because they were careful, measured, the way someone spoke when they'd been hurt badly enough to never trust again easily. Walking to his car, Daniel realized what Ava had done. She hadn't rejected his contract out of spite. That would have given him power, made him the victim of her vindictiveness. Instead, she'd accepted it with conditions that put her firmly in control. When someone underestimates you, is it better to prove them wrong quietly or make sure they watch every step of your success? What's your strategy? He was going to have to watch her excel every single day. Watch other people respect and admire her. Watch her be everything he'd once claimed she couldn't become. And he was going to do it while knowing that every achievement, every moment of brilliance, every life she saved was proof of how monumentally he'd screwed up. Ava stood at her office window, watching Daniel's BMW disappear into Houston traffic. Phase 1 complete. He thought she'd forgiven him, thought this was about business. He had no idea she was just getting started. The real test would come tomorrow, during surgery, when his precious technology would face its first critical case. She'd seen the beta testing reports, impressive on paper, but she knew better than most that medicine was unpredictable. Technology failed when lives hung in the balance. As Daniel left her office, Ava allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. He thought she'd forgiven him, thought this was about business. He had no idea she was just getting started. The real test would come tomorrow, during surgery, when his precious technology would face its first critical case. The senator's heart stopped beating at 2:47 a.m., the same moment Daniel's software crashed and his empire began crumbling in an operating room he'd never seen. Daniel jerked awake to his phone buzzing against the hotel nightstand. The caller ID made his blood freeze. Houston Methodist Hospital. Emergency. Mr. Carter? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Dr. Kim from the surgical team. We need you here immediately. There's been a complication with your software during Senator Morrison's cardiac procedure. 20 minutes later, Daniel burst through the hospital's main entrance, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt and dress pants he'd thrown on in panic. The elevator ride to the surgical floor felt endless, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Operating room 3 hummed with controlled chaos. Monitors beeping, assistants moving with precision, bright lights eliminating shadows. But when he looked through the observation window, the screens that should have displayed his software's interface were black. Complete system failure. Inside the OR, Ava worked with the focused intensity of a master craftsman. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, every cut and suture performed from muscle memory and 15 years of experience. Around her, the surgical team followed her lead without question, their trust in her ability absolute. Clamp, she called, voice steady despite the crisis. More suction here. Senator Morrison lay open on the table, his life literally in her hands while the technology designed to assist her sat useless and dark. Daniel watched, mesmerized despite his panic, as Ava performed surgery the way surgeons had for centuries, with skill, instinct, and unwavering determination. She was magnificent. The thought hit him like a physical blow. This was what he dismissed as not ambitious enough. This woman, commanding a room full of medical professionals while holding a man's beating heart, was what he'd been embarrassed to claim as his wife. Vitals are stabilizing, someone reported. Good. Let's close him up. Ava's voice remained calm, but Daniel caught the slight sag in her shoulders as the immediate danger passed. For hours later, she emerged from the OR, pulling off her surgical cap to release waves of dark hair. Her scrubs were stained, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes held the quiet satisfaction of someone who just saved a life. Daniel stood as she approached, every apology he'd prepared dying in his throat. Your software crashed completely, she said without preamble. Power surge took down the entire network at 2:43 a.m., 4 minutes into the most critical phase of the procedure. Ava, Senator Morrison is alive because I didn't need your technology to do my job. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but he heard the accusation underneath. The question is, what are you going to do to make sure this never happens again? He stared at her, this woman who just performed a medical miracle while his million-dollar software sat broken and useless. Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, she repeated, studying his face. Interesting choice of words. Have you ever had to perform under pressure when everything went wrong? When you had to rely purely on skill and experience? Share your moment of truth. Around them, the surgical floor continued its never-ending rhythm of crisis and recovery. But in the space between them, something had shifted. Daniel had seen what Ava was capable of without him, and the knowledge was both humbling and arousing in a way that made no sense. The board meeting is in 12 hours, Ava continued. They'll want a full report on what happened tonight. An explanation for why the hospital's new multi-million-dollar system failed during its first critical test. Daniel's mouth went dry. What are you going to tell them? Ava looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with the weight of his company's future pressing down on his chest. As the senator's vital signs stabilized, Daniel realized 2 things. Ava had just saved his career by not letting the patient die, and she was the only witness to his software's catastrophic failure. In 12 hours, the hospital board would ask for her report. His future rested in the hands of the woman he'd thrown away. She held his career in her hands the same way he'd once held her heart, with the power to crush it completely. They met in the hospital's rooftop garden at dawn, Houston's skyline painted in gold and shadow. The space was meant for healing, for family members needing air after receiving devastating news. How fitting. Daniel had texted her at 5 a.m. "Please, 5 minutes. I need to explain." Now he stood among the carefully tended roses and healing herbs, watching Ava approach with the measured steps of someone who'd learned never to rush toward anything that might hurt her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, the first time he'd seen her in civilian clothes since she'd walked back into his life. Without the armor of her professional wardrobe, she looked younger, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with in that cramped apartment years ago. But her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. "You have 4 minutes," she said, checking her watch. "The board meeting starts in 3 hours." Daniel's prepared speech evaporated. Standing this close to her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with that new confidence, he could barely form coherent thoughts. "The software failure," he began, then stopped. "That wasn't what mattered. Ava, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking your technology nearly killed a United States senator on its first day of implementation," she replied coolly. "I'm thinking you promised the board revolutionary efficiency and delivered a system crash during the most critical 4 minutes of a man's life. I know how bad it looks." "It doesn't look bad, Daniel. It is bad." She stepped closer, and he caught a glimpse of the fire that had always burned beneath her calm surface. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have someone's life in your hands when the tools you're counting on simply stop working?" He didn't, and they both knew it. "I can fix the software," he said desperately. "The power surge issue, the backup systems, I can rebuild everything from the ground up. Make it bulletproof." "Can you?" Ava tilted her head, studying him like a particularly interesting medical case. "Or are you going to abandon this project the same way you abandoned us when it got too difficult?" The accusation hit like a scalpel between his ribs, precise and devastating. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Ava laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? You filed for divorce while I was working a 36-hour shift. Left the papers on our kitchen counter like a grocery list. Was that fair?" Daniel flinched. I thought I was setting you free to find someone better. You thought you were saving yourself the embarrassment of being married to someone your friends looked down on." Her voice stayed level, but he saw her hands clench into fists. "Don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better about being a coward." The word hung between them like a diagnosis neither wanted to hear. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was a coward. I let other people's opinions matter more than what we had. I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too insecure to handle being with someone stronger than me." Ava blinked, clearly not expecting honesty. "I know what you're thinking," he continued, voice breaking. "I destroyed us, and now you can destroy me." "The difference is," she replied, "I'm not the same person who would choose revenge over doing what's right. If someone who hurt you deeply needed your help, could you rise above the pain to do the right thing? What would your choice be?" The sun climbed higher, painting the garden in shades of possibility and regret. Around them, the city awakened to another day of crises and healing. But in this small space above the chaos, two people who'd loved each other badly stood at the crossroads of second chances and final endings. "What are you going to tell the board?" Daniel asked, hating how desperate he sounded. Ava was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "I'm going to tell them the truth. That technology fails, but skilled surgeons adapt. That your software has potential, but needs work. That medical innovation requires partnership between tech developers and medical professionals, not just flashy presentations and empty promises." Daniel stared at her. "You're protecting me?" "I'm protecting the patients who might benefit from functional medical technology," she corrected. "And I'm protecting my hospital's reputation from the scandal that would come from a public software failure on day one." She started to walk away, then paused. "But Daniel, this is your one chance. If your technology fails again, if you disappear when things get complicated, if you prove that you're still the man who runs instead of fighting for what matters, I will end you professionally. And personally, you'll be dead to me forever." Ava walked away without giving him an answer, leaving Daniel alone as the sun rose over the city they'd once planned to conquer together. In 3 hours, she would face the board. In 3 hours, his fate would be decided by the woman whose dreams he dismissed as too small. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She stood before the board with the power to end him, and chose to save him instead, for reasons that had nothing to do with mercy and everything to do with chess. The boardroom filled with Houston's medical elite, department heads, investors, administrators whose decisions affected thousands of lives. Ava commanded the room, not through volume, but through quiet authority that made everyone lean in to listen. Daniel sat in the back corner, palms sweating as he watched her open the folder containing his professional death sentence. One word from her: failure, unreliable, dangerous, and his company would be blacklisted from every hospital in Texas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ava began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd spent the night saving lives while others slept, "I want to discuss last night's cardiac procedure on Senator Morrison." A murmur rippled through the room. Everyone knew about the late-night emergency surgery, but not the details. At 2:43 a.m., we experienced a complete power surge that affected several hospital systems, including our new surgical software. Ava's eyes found Daniel's across the room, and he saw something that made his breath catch. Not anger, strategy. However, I'm pleased to report that Senator Morrison is recovering well, and the surgery was completed successfully using traditional methods combined with functional backup protocols. Daniel blinked. She was reframing the disaster as a learning opportunity. This incident highlights the importance of comprehensive testing and the irreplaceable value of skilled surgical teams who can adapt when technology encounters unexpected challenges. Board members nodded, making notes. They were buying it, Ava's version of events that protected the hospital's reputation while acknowledging room for improvement. "Dr. Thompson," the chairman interrupted, "what's your recommendation regarding the software contract?" This was the moment. Daniel's entire future balanced on whatever came out of her mouth next. Ava stood straighter, every inch the confident department head. "I recommend we continue the partnership with enhanced oversight protocols. Mr. Carter's team will work directly under surgical department supervision to address the power surge vulnerability and strengthen backup systems." The relief that flooded through Daniel was so intense he nearly fell off his chair. She was saving him. But why? Additionally, Ava continued, "I suggest mandatory on-site presence for all technical personnel during the beta testing phase. We need immediate access to decision-makers if issues arise." Translation: Daniel would be working under her direct supervision, answering to her every day. She wasn't just saving his contract, she was claiming ownership of him. "Excellent proposal," the chairman said. "Mr. Carter, are these terms acceptable?" Daniel stood on shaky legs. "Absolutely. Whatever Dr. Thompson requires." Across the room, Ava's smile was small but unmistakable. She had him exactly where she wanted him. The meeting concluded with handshakes and scheduling discussions, but Daniel barely heard the details. As board members filed out, praising Dr. Thompson's thorough analysis and professional handling of the crisis, he remained frozen in place. She'd saved him, but the way she'd done it, making him completely dependent on her approval, her protection, her goodwill, was more devastating than any revenge could have been. "Mr. Carter?" Ava appeared beside his chair, close enough that he caught her perfume again. Or she led him to the empty hallway outside the boardroom, her heels clicking on polished floors like a countdown timer. "Thank you," he managed. "I don't understand why you protected you." Ava finished. "Because destroying you would have taken 5 minutes. Owning you is going to take much longer." The words hit him like ice water. This wasn't mercy. This was control. "You wanted a second chance," she continued, straightening his tie with fingers that barely touched but burned like brands. "Congratulations. You've got one." But understand something, Daniel. You belong to me now. Your success, your reputation, your entire professional future depends on my goodwill. Her hand lingered against his chest, right over his racing heart. Don't disappoint me again. Sometimes the smartest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's making them owe you everything. Have you ever played the long game? Tell me about your most strategic move. As she walked away, her words echoed in the empty hallway. Report to my office tomorrow at 6 a.m. We have work to do. Daniel stood alone, realizing that Ava had just demonstrated exactly why she'd become chief of surgery while he'd spent 5 years building technology to solve problems that skilled doctors handle with their bare hands. After the meeting, Daniel cornered her in the elevator. Why, he asked. Why save me when you had every reason to destroy me? Ava smiled, not warmly, but with something that made his pulse quicken. Because destroying you would have taken 5 minutes. Owning you is going to take much longer. Forcing him to work directly under her supervision wasn't about the technology. It was about watching the man who once controlled her every move learn to follow her lead. Daniel arrived at the hospital at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes early because showing up late to work under Ava's supervision felt like professional suicide. The corridors buzzed with pre-dawn activity, night shift nurses finishing reports, early residents grabbing coffee. The eternal rhythm of a place where crises didn't respect normal business hours. He found her in operating room 2, reviewing surgical schedules with her team. Through the glass partition, he watched her gesture at monitors and equipment, explaining something to a younger doctor who hung on her every word like she was dispensing gospel. This was her kingdom, and he was about to become her most closely watched subject. Mr. Carter. Ava noticed him waiting and stepped out of the OR, pulling off her surgical cap. Her hair tumbled free, and he had to force himself not to remember how it used to feel spread across his pillow. Ready to see how your software performs in the real world? The next 6 hours were educational in the most humbling way possible. Daniel followed Ava through the hospital corridors like an intern, watching her navigate her domain with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere she stepped. Nurses updated her on patient conditions. Residents sought her input on complex cases. Other department heads deferred to her judgment on resource allocation. She moved through this world like a queen, while he trailed behind carrying laptop bags and taking notes on software modifications. The interface needs to be simpler, she said during their third procedure observation. When someone's bleeding out, I don't have time to navigate through 5 different screens to adjust settings. Daniel typed furiously, trying to keep up with her rapid-fire suggestions while simultaneously trying not to stare at the way her scrubs hugged her figure. Professional torture of the highest order. Are you listening to me? Ava's voice cut through his distraction. Yes, absolutely. Simpler interface. Fewer screens. He looked up to find her watching him with an expression that suggested she'd caught his wandering attention. Good, because in 2 hours, we're testing the updated power surge protocols during Mrs. Chen's gallbladder removal. Your technology either works perfectly or I shut it down permanently. The way she said it, calm, matter of fact, absolutely certain of her authority, made something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with professional anxiety. During lunch break, they reviewed technical specifications in her office. Ava sat behind her desk, pointing out problems with his code while he leaned over her shoulder to see the screen. Every time she moved, her hair brushed against his arm. Every time she spoke, her breath warmed his neck. This subroutine here, she said, highlighting a section of code. What happens if the surgeon needs to override the automatic settings? Daniel tried to focus on the technical question, but her proximity was scrambling his brain. She smelled like vanilla and determination, and when she turned to look at him, her face was inches from his. We can add manual override controls, he managed. We? She raised an eyebrow. I think you mean you can add them. I'm just a medical expert making sure your technology doesn't kill anyone. The subtle reminder of their roles, her in charge, him following orders, sent heat racing through his veins in a way that probably wasn't appropriate for a business meeting. Have you ever had to work closely with someone from your past? How did you handle the mix of professional requirements and personal history? By the end of the day, Daniel's head was spinning from technical requirements and the constant awareness of Ava's presence. She'd been professional, demanding, and completely in control. Exactly what he should have expected from the woman who'd become chief of surgery. What he hadn't expected was how attractive her competence would be. How watching her command respect from everyone around her would make him remember why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place, before his insecurity had poisoned everything good between them. Same time tomorrow, Ava said as they wrapped up the day's session. And Daniel? The gallbladder procedure starts at 7 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She gathered her files and headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and fixed the interface lag in the monitoring system. It's annoying. As she left, Daniel sat alone in her office, surrounded by evidence of her success. Awards, certifications, thank you letters from grateful patients. 5 years ago, he thought her dreams were too small. Now he was beginning to understand that his world had been the limited one. During a late-night software update, Daniel found Ava alone in her office, still in scrubs from emergency surgery. "You never used to work this late," he said softly. She looked up, exhaustion making her guard slip. "You never used to care about my work schedule." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. It was 2 a.m. when her armor finally cracked. Not from his attacks, but from his unexpected honesty about the biggest mistake of his life. The hospital at 2 a.m. existed in a different reality, dimmed lights casting long shadows, the skeleton crew moving like ghosts through hushed corridors. In her office, surrounded by medical journals and patient files, the outside world felt impossibly far away. Daniel hadn't planned to stay this late, but the software updates required monitoring, and somehow the hours had slipped away while he worked in the quiet efficiency of Ava's domain. When he looked up from his laptop, she was standing in the doorway, still wearing scrubs from an emergency appendectomy. "You're still here," she said, not quite a question. "The monitoring protocols needed real-time testing," he replied, closing the laptop. "I wanted to make sure everything was stable before tomorrow's procedures." Ava nodded and moved to her desk, pulling off her surgical cap with a sigh that spoke of 14-hour days and the weight of other people's lives. Her hair fell around her shoulders in waves that caught the lamplight, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the woman he'd married. Tired, dedicated, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or designer clothes. "Long day?" he asked. "Quel accident?" "Teenage girl, internal bleeding." Ava rubbed her temples. "She'll be fine," but it was touch and go for a while. Daniel watched her decompress from the surgery, watched her shoulders release tension she'd been carrying for hours. This was the part of her work he'd never really understood. The emotional cost of holding lives in your hands, the way each save and loss became part of you. "You never used to work this late," he said softly. She looked up, something vulnerable flickering in her dark eyes. "You never used to care about my work schedule." The accusation hung between them, gentle but devastating. Because she was right. He'd complained when she worked doubles, made comments about her never being home, acted like her dedication to saving lives was somehow a personal inconvenience. "I cared," he said. I didn't understand what it meant to you." "No, you didn't." Ava leaned back in her chair, studying him with the careful attention she probably gave complex medical cases. "You saw my job as something I did, not something I was. You never understood that being a nurse, helping people heal, wasn't just work for me. It was purpose." Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, years of justification and self-protection crumbling under the quiet truth in her voice. "I was jealous," he admitted. "Jealous?" She sounded genuinely surprised. "Of your patients, of your coworkers, of anyone who got to see the passionate, dedicated side of you." He ran his hands through his hair, suddenly exhausted. "You came alive at that hospital in a way you never did with me. I felt like I was competing with your calling, and I was losing." Ava stared at him. "So you decided to make me choose." "I decided to make the choice for you," he corrected. "Because I was a coward who couldn't handle being with someone whose purpose was bigger than mine." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of unspoken truths and missed understanding. Outside her office, the hospital continued its never-ending work. Nurses checking on patients, residents catching power naps in break rooms, the eternal cycle of healing that Ava had chosen over him. I convinced myself you weren't ambitious because I was terrified you were more ambitious than me, just in ways that actually mattered, Daniel continued, the words tumbling out like a confession. Your dreams were about saving lives. Mine were about making money. Guess which one kept me awake at night with pride? Have you ever realized too late that you lost someone not because they weren't enough, but because you weren't ready for how much they were? Share your too late moment. Ava's professional mask had completely dissolved, leaving behind the woman he'd fallen in love with in a cramped apartment years ago. The woman who'd worked double shifts to support his startup dreams, who'd believed in his potential even when investors didn't, who'd loved him with a fierce loyalty he'd thrown away for the approval of people who didn't matter. I see that now, she said quietly. But seeing it doesn't fix what you broke. I know. Daniel looked down at his hands, the same hands that had signed divorce papers instead of fighting for their marriage. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But Ava, watching you these past few days, seeing what you've become, who you've always been, I need you to know that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away immediately. For a moment, they were just two people who'd loved each other badly, sitting in the dark, remembering what they destroyed. But then her pager buzzed, emergency surgery, and the spell broke. As she rushed out, Daniel sat alone, wondering if redemption was possible or if some mistakes were too deep to heal. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away immediately. For a moment, they were just two people who'd loved each other badly, sitting in the dark, remembering what they destroyed. But then her pager buzzed, emergency surgery, and the spell broke. As she rushed out, Daniel sat alone, wondering if redemption was possible or if some mistakes were too deep to heal. The car accident victim wheeled into trauma bay 2 wasn't just another patient. He was the senator's son, and if Ava couldn't save him, Daniel's software failure would become front-page news. The call came at 3:17 a.m., 30 minutes after Daniel's late-night confession in Ava's office. Multi-vehicle accident on I-45. 3 victims, 1 critical. ETA 4 minutes. Daniel was still gathering his equipment when the ambulance sirens wailed through the hospital's emergency entrance. Through the trauma bay windows, he watched Ava transform from the vulnerable woman who'd almost let him touch her hand into the commanding surgeon who could pull people back from death. 22-year-old male, severe abdominal trauma, possible internal bleeding. The paramedic rattled off vitals as they wheeled the patient in. Blood pressure dropping. Lost consciousness twice during transport. Daniel's software system hummed to life, monitors displaying real-time data as Ava's team surrounded the gurney. The upgrades he'd made over the past week were about to face their first real-world test, and his throat went dry when he recognized the patient's face from newspaper photos. James Morrison, Senator Morrison's only son. Give me a type and cross-match, 6 units of O-negative standing by. Ava called, her hands already assessing the damage. And someone called the OR. We're going up in 5 minutes. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes, high-profile case that could make or break careers. If Daniel's technology failed again, if there was even a hint of malfunction during the surgery to save a senator's son, the media attention would destroy both their professional lives. But as Ava worked, Daniel watched his software perform flawlessly. Real-time vital monitoring, surgical planning algorithms, backup power systems running smoothly despite the hospital's notorious electrical issues. Everything he'd rebuilt after the first disaster was working exactly as designed. Beautiful, Ava murmured, studying the diagnostic images on his screens. Clean trauma pattern, missed the major vessels by millimeters. She wasn't just talking about the patient's injuries. She was acknowledging that his technology was actually helping, providing the detailed information she needed to save a life. In Operating Room 1, they worked together with the synchronization of dancers who'd been partners for years. Daniel monitored system performance, while Ava commanded the surgical team, every movement precise and confident. Pressure is stabilizing, someone reported. Good. Suction here. Ava's hands moved with mechanical precision. Every cut and repair guided by years of training and the crystal-clear imaging from Daniel's rebuilt software. He found himself watching her work with something approaching awe. This was what he'd been too insecure to appreciate. Not just her technical skill, but the way she became completely present in these moments, the way everything else in the world faded except the life she was fighting to save. There, she said, completing the final suture. That should hold. How are we looking, Daniel? The question sent electricity through him. She was asking for his input, treating him like a partner instead of subordinate. All systems green. Vitals are strong and stable. As the patient's vital signs normalized, the OR team relaxed with a collective sigh of people who'd just witnessed a miracle. James Morrison would live, would recover completely, would never know how close he'd come to becoming a national tragedy. Outstanding work, Dr. Thompson, the anesthesiologist said. That was textbook perfect under serious pressure. But Ava was looking at Daniel, something new in her expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. Acknowledgement that his technology had contributed to saving a life. Have you ever found yourself working perfectly with someone you have complicated history with? When crisis strips away everything else, what's left underneath? Outside the OR, as they disposed of surgical gowns and washed their hands, the adrenaline began wearing off. In the quiet aftermath of crisis, Daniel realized something had shifted between them. They'd worked together, trusted each other, succeeded together. We make a good team, he said quietly. We always did, Ava replied, and this time, she wasn't just talking about work. Before either could explore what that meant, the trauma bay doors burst open again. Senator Morrison, still in pajamas and a hastily thrown-on coat, his wife clutching his arm as they rushed toward their son's room. Dr. Thompson, the senator spotted Ava immediately. How is he? Is James going to be okay? He's going to be fine, Senator, Ava assured him. The surgery was successful. He'll need a few days to recover, but there should be no lasting effects. As the relieved parents rushed to their son's bedside, Daniel stood beside Ava in the hallway, both still wearing surgical scrubs, both carrying the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. As the patient's vital signs stabilized, Daniel and Ava stood side by side, still in surgical gear, hands still stained with someone else's blood. We make a good team, he said quietly. We always did, she replied. And this time, she wasn't just talking about work. But before either could say more, the patient's father, the senator, burst through the doors, and everything changed again. The senator's public praise for Dr. Thompson and her innovative partner thrust them into the spotlight neither wanted, as Houston's power couple who might just be falling in love again. The press conference happened before either of them could object. Senator Morrison, grateful and emotional after his son's successful surgery, insisted on publicly thanking the medical team that had saved James's life. Daniel found himself standing next to Ava in the hospital's main lobby, camera flashes exploding like lightning as reporters shouted questions about the innovative surgical technology that had helped save the senator's son. Dr. Thompson, a reporter called out, "Can you tell us about your partnership with Carter Medical Technologies? Our sources say you and Mr. Carter were previously married." Ava's hand found Daniel's arm, a gesture that looked supportive to the cameras but felt electric to him. Mr. Carter's software provided crucial real-time monitoring during a complex trauma surgery, she said smoothly. Our professional collaboration focuses entirely on advancing patient care through medical innovation. But you were married before, another reporter pressed. Dr. Thompson's personal life is not relevant to her extraordinary surgical skills. Senator Morrison intervened, but the damage was done. The story wasn't just about successful surgery anymore. It was about the divorced couple working together to save lives. By evening, the hospital's PR department was fielding calls from major news outlets. Houston's medical power couple, the surgeon and the tech entrepreneur who found love through healing. The headlines wrote themselves. This is a disaster. Daniel said, pacing Ava's office while she scrolled through news alerts on her phone. Is it? She looked up with an expression he couldn't read. Your stock price is up 12% since this morning. My department just received 3 major research grant applications. Sometimes public attention brings unexpected benefits. He stopped pacing. You're enjoying this. I'm managing this, she corrected. The same way I manage everything else in my life, strategically. The charity gala invitation arrived by special messenger 20 minutes later. Houston Methodist Hospital's board of directors cordially invited Dr. Ava Thompson and Mr. Daniel Carter to serve as guests of honor at the annual Medical Innovation Fundraiser. Black tie required. RSVP requested within 24 hours. They want us to attend together, Daniel said, reading over her shoulder. As a couple, as partners, Ava corrected, but her breath caught when he moved closer to read the invitation. The media will expect us to play the part. Happy reunion, love conquering past mistakes, all that romantic nonsense. Ava set down the invitation and turned to face him, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes. And what part would you be playing exactly? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly, because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Working together, saving lives together, seeing each other as equals instead of threats, all of it was rebuilding something Daniel had thought he destroyed forever. I'd be playing the man who's grateful for a second chance, he said quietly. And I'd be playing the woman who's smart enough not to make the same mistake twice. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the careful professional distance they'd maintained cracked open to reveal the electricity still crackling between them. Have you ever had to pretend relationship was something different than it actually was? How do you handle when public perception doesn't match private reality? So we go. Ava decided. We attend as professional partners. We raise money for medical research, and we give the media exactly enough of a story to satisfy their curiosity without compromising either of our careers. And afterward, she studied his face with the careful attention she gave complex medical cases. Afterward, we see if this partnership can survive outside the hospital walls. The gala was in 3 days. 3 days to figure out how to be in public together without revealing how much the lines between professional and personal were blurring. 3 days to prepare for an evening that could either cement their working relationship or destroy any chance they had of rebuilding something real. As Daniel left her office that evening, Ava remained at her desk, staring at the elegant invitation. Attending together would cement their public image as a power couple. Declining would raise questions neither could answer. The charity gala invitation arrived that evening. Houston's medical elite hosting a fundraiser in their honor. Attending together would cement their public image as a power couple. Declining would raise questions neither could answer. As Ava held the elegant invitation, Daniel waited for her decision, knowing it would determine whether they were merely colleagues, partners, or something more dangerous. The Black Tie Charity Gala wasn't just about raising money for medical research. It was about whether 2 broken hearts could dance together without bleeding all over the ballroom floor. The Hilton Americas ballroom glittered with Houston's elite, crystal chandeliers casting diamonds of light across designer gowns and $1,000 tuxedos. Medical pioneers mingled with oil executives, tech entrepreneurs networked with hospital board members, and everyone pretended their charitable donations weren't just tax write-offs. Daniel adjusted his bow tie for the 10th time, watching the elevator numbers climb toward the grand ballroom. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man who looked confident, successful, worthy of being honored at Houston's most prestigious medical fundraiser. But inside, he felt like a fraud about to be exposed. When the doors opened, the first person he saw was Ava. She stood near the registration table, wearing a midnight blue gown that hugged every curve he remembered and showcased new confidence he was still learning to appreciate. Her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist, diamonds at her throat catching light like captured stars. She was breathtaking in a way that made conversation stop and heads turn. But what struck him most wasn't her beauty, it was her presence. She commanded that ballroom the same way, she commanded her operating room, moving through Houston's power players with the quiet authority of someone who belonged everywhere she stepped. Mr. Carter, she approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ready to charm donors into funding medical innovation? Ready to follow your lead? He replied, offering his arm. This is your world, not mine. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise at his deference, or maybe appreciation that he wasn't trying to take credit for achievements that belonged to her. As they moved through the cocktail hour, Daniel watched Ava work the room with surgical precision. She knew everyone, department heads from competing hospitals, pharmaceutical executives, politicians whose healthcare votes determined millions of lives. And everyone treated her with the respect due to someone who'd earned her position through skill rather than connections. Dr. Thompson, a woman in emeralds, gushed. That article in Medical Journal Weekly about your trauma surgery techniques was revolutionary. Are you considering expanding your research? With the right partnerships, Ava replied, glancing meaningfully at Daniel. We're exploring several innovative approaches to surgical technology integration. She was including him in conversations, presenting them as equals despite the fact that her expertise saved lives while his just made procedures more efficient. The generosity of that gesture wasn't lost on him. Daniel Carter, isn't it? A familiar voice made them both turn. Marcus Webb approached with his country club smile and calculating eyes. The same man whose party had started the beginning of their end 5 years ago. Marcus! Daniel's jaw tightened despite his best efforts to remain diplomatic. I hear congratulations are in order. Successful surgery, positive media coverage, stock prices rising. Marcus's smile held the same condescension Daniel remembered. Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see you two working together again. The pause before working together carried implications that made Daniel's blood pressure spike. Dr. Thompson and I have a professional partnership focused on advancing patient care, Daniel replied carefully. Of course, Marcus agreed, but his eyes suggested he didn't believe a word of it. Though one has to wonder if mixing business with personal history is wise for either of your reputations. Before Daniel could respond with something he'd regret, Ava stepped closer, her hand finding his arm in a gesture that looked casual but felt like claiming territory. Mr. Webb, her voice carried the polite chill reserved for particularly annoying patients. I find that people who focus on other people's relationships usually have issues with their own. How's Patricia, by the way? I heard she's been spending a lot of time at the country club with your tennis instructor. Marcus's smile faltered, color draining from his face like she'd just diagnosed him with something terminal. If you'll excuse us, Ava continued smoothly. We need to prepare for our presentation. She led Daniel away before Marcus could recover from the surgical strike to his ego, leaving him standing alone near the bar looking like he'd been hit by a medical truck. That was brutal, Daniel said once they were out of earshot. That was necessary, Ava corrected. Men like Marcus only understand power, and he needed to understand that questioning my judgment is a losing game. Daniel stared at her with something approaching awe. This wasn't the woman who used to apologize for taking up space or defer to his opinions about her own career. This Ava defended herself and him with equal ferocity. You didn't have to protect me, he said quietly. I wasn't protecting you, she replied, adjusting his bow tie with fingers that lingered longer than necessary. I was protecting us. Whatever this partnership is becoming, I won't let anyone undermine it with gossip and innuendo. The word us hung between them like a promise neither was ready to make explicitly. Have you ever had to defend a relationship that you weren't sure how to define? When the outside world demands labels for something that's still figuring itself out. As the evening progressed toward dinner and speeches, Daniel realized they were walking a tightrope between professional colleagues and something far more dangerous. Every shared glance, every casual touch, every moment of synchronization was being cataloged by people who made careers out of other people's business. Ladies and gentlemen, the evening's host called for attention. Please welcome this year's guests of honor, the medical team that saved Senator Morrison's son through innovative surgical technology, Dr. Ava Thompson and Mr. Daniel Carter. The applause thundered through the ballroom as they walked toward the podium, hundreds of Houston's most powerful people acknowledging their success. But Daniel barely heard the noise. All his attention focused on the woman beside him, the way she held herself with quiet pride, the way she'd become everything he'd once been too insecure to celebrate. At the podium, Ava spoke about medical innovation with the passion of someone who dedicated her life to healing. Daniel provided technical details with newfound humility about his role in saving lives. Together, they painted a picture of partnership between medical expertise and technological advancement. But in the audience, among the applause and admiration, Daniel caught sight of reporters taking notes, photographers capturing moments that would become tomorrow's headlines. Whatever happened between them after tonight would play out under public scrutiny that could enhance or destroy both their careers. As they returned to their table amid standing ovation, Ava leaned close enough that her perfume made his head spin. "Ready for the hard part?" she whispered. "What's the hard part?" "Figuring out what we're going to do when the cameras stop rolling and we have to decide if this is real or just good theater." The question followed them through dinner courses and donor presentations, through polite conversations and careful networking. Because everyone was watching, everyone was speculating, and by tomorrow, the entire medical community would have opinions about whether Houston's power couple was personal, professional, or just good publicity. The real test of any relationship isn't how you perform in public. It's what happens in the quiet moments when nobody's watching and you have to decide who you really are to each other. The hotel suite door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. After 4 hours of cameras, conversations, and careful public performance, the absence of scrutiny felt almost overwhelming. Daniel loosened his bow tie and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Houston's glittering skyline. The charity gala had been a success. Over $2 million raised for medical research, positive press coverage, and enough networking to launch several new partnerships. By any professional measure, the evening had been perfect. So why did he feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff? "That went well," Ava said behind him, her voice carefully neutral. He heard the soft rustle of expensive fabric as she moved through the suite, the quiet clink of jewelry being removed and set on marble surfaces. "Better than expected," he agreed, not turning around. If he looked at her now, while the adrenaline from public performance was still singing in his veins, he might say something that would shatter the careful professional distance they'd maintained. "The board was pleased with the donation numbers," she continued, and he could hear her moving closer. "Dr. Martinez said 3 different hospitals want to schedule presentations about our surgical technology integration." "Our technology," he repeated, finally turning to face her. She'd removed her heels and jewelry, let down her hair so it fell in waves around her shoulders. Without the armor of formal attire, she looked younger, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with years ago. But her eyes held wariness that hadn't been there then, the careful protection of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "That's what we agreed to call it publicly," she said. "Partnership implies equal contribution, even though your surgical expertise is what actually saves lives." Ava studied his face with the intense focus she usually reserved for complex medical cases. "What are you doing, Daniel?" "I'm trying to figure out what's real," he said honestly. "Tonight, watching you command that room, seeing how everyone respects what you've accomplished, I keep wondering why you're giving me any credit at all." "Because the technology works," she replied simply. "Because when it functions properly, it helps me save lives more efficiently. Because despite your past mistakes, you built something valuable." "That's the professional answer," Daniel said, stepping closer. "What's the personal one?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Outside the windows, Houston sprawled in all directions. Millions of people living their lives, making their choices, deciding what risks were worth taking. But in this hotel suite, the only choice that mattered was whether 2 damaged people could find their way back to something real. "The personal answer," Ava said quietly, "is that I spent 5 years hating you for making me feel like my dreams weren't big enough. And now I'm discovering that maybe you were just too small to see how big they actually were." The words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He admitted, I was threatened by your certainty about what mattered. You knew you wanted to heal people, to make a difference, to do something that would outlast you. All I knew was that I wanted to be successful, and I was terrified that wouldn't be enough for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone who had purpose beyond profit margins. Someone who measured success by lives saved instead of money earned. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, destroying hours of careful styling. I convinced myself you weren't ambitious because I was scared you were more ambitious than me, just in ways that actually mattered. Ava moved to the window beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the faint scent of hospital antiseptic that seemed permanently woven into her skin, a combination that shouldn't have been attractive but somehow was. Do you know what I thought about during Senator Morrison's surgery? She asked. The technology was working perfectly. Real-time monitoring, backup systems stable, everything functioning exactly as designed. And for the first time in 5 years, I had a partner who enhanced what I could do instead of questioning why I wanted to do it. Daniel's breath caught. A partner? That's the problem, Ava said, still looking out at the city lights. Professionally, we work. We complement each other's strengths, cover each other's weaknesses, achieve better results together than either of us could alone. But I don't know if I can trust you with anything more than professional partnership. She turned to face him, and her eyes held years of careful self-protection. You left once when things got complicated. You chose other people's opinions over our relationship. You decided I wasn't worth fighting for. The accusation was delivered without anger, which somehow made it more devastating than screaming would have been. I know, Daniel said. And I know that saying I was wrong, that I was scared, that I've regretted it every day since doesn't fix what I broke. No, it doesn't. They stood in silence. Two people who'd loved each other badly, who'd found their way to effective partnership, who were trying to decide if redemption was possible or if some mistakes cut too deep to heal. Have you ever stood at the crossroads between forgiveness and self-protection? How do you decide whether someone who hurt you deserves another chance to do it again? What do you want from me, Ava? Daniel asked finally. I want proof, she said. Not words, not promises, not grand gestures. Proof that you've become someone who stays when things get difficult. Someone who values what we build together more than what other people think about it. How do I prove that? Time, she replied. Consistency. Showing up every day, not just when it's convenient or profitable or publicly beneficial. Daniel nodded, understanding that she was offering him something precious and terrifying. Not forgiveness, but the opportunity to earn it. The partnership continues? He asked. The partnership continues, she agreed. But anything personal, that's going to take a lot more than one successful evening in evening wear. As if by mutual agreement, they moved apart, creating physical distance that matched the emotional space she needed. But as Daniel loosened his bow tie and Ava gathered her jewelry, both carried the weight of possibility. Fragile, complicated, dangerous possibility. Same time on day? Ava asked, her tone shifting back to professional. Same time on day, Daniel confirmed. But as she headed toward the suite's bedroom, she paused at the doorway. Daniel? Yeah. Tonight was good. Not just the gala, working together, presenting as partners, seeing what we can accomplish when we're not fighting each other. Yeah, it was. Don't make me regret giving you this chance. After she closed the bedroom door, Daniel stood alone in the suite's living area, city lights painting shadows across expensive furniture. The evening had been a success by every measure, but the real work was just beginning. Because earning back the trust of someone you betrayed wasn't about grand gestures or public performances. It was about showing up day after day, proving through actions that the person who'd walked away wasn't the person asking for another chance. When 3 patients arrived simultaneously with life-threatening injuries, Ava faced a choice every surgeon dreads: who lives, who dies, and whether the man she's learning to trust again will stand with her when the pressure could crush them both. The emergency alert screamed through Houston Methodist Hospital at 4:23 a.m. Mass casualty incident. Multiple trauma patients incoming. All available surgical staff report immediately. Daniel jerked awake in his hotel room, phone buzzing with automated messages from the hospital's crisis management system. Multi-vehicle pileup on Highway 290. 7 vehicles involved. Multiple critical injuries requiring immediate surgery. By the time he reached the hospital, the emergency department looked like organized chaos. Paramedics wheeled gurneys through automated doors while trauma teams organized into units, voices calling out vital signs and injury assessments over the controlled noise of life-saving urgency. He found Ava in Trauma Bay 1, already in scrubs, moving between 3 critical patients with the focused intensity of a conductor orchestrating a symphony where wrong notes meant death. Status report. She called to her senior resident. Patient 1, 26-year-old female, massive internal bleeding, needs surgery immediately. Patient 2, 43-year-old male, traumatic brain injury, unstable but operable. Patient 3, 16-year-old male, multiple organ damage, critical but stable for now. Daniel watched Ava process the information, her mind working through calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics and everything to do with playing God. 3 patients, 2 operating rooms immediately available. 1 surgeon capable of handling the most critical cases. This was the choice that haunted every trauma surgeon. Medical triage at its most brutal. Who gets saved first? Who might die waiting? How do you choose which life is worth more when they're all precious to someone? Dr. Kim, take the brain injury 2 or 2. Ava decided. I'll handle the internal bleeding in or 1. Get patient 3 stabilized and prepped. We'll assess him after the first 2 surgeries. It was the right call medically, but Daniel could see the weight of it in her shoulders. The 16-year-old would have to wait, hope his condition remained stable while she fought to save someone else's daughter and another family's father. Your software systems? She asked Daniel as they scrubbed in. All green. Backup power tested and functioning. No technical failures tonight, he assured her. But as they entered OR 1, Daniel realized this wasn't about technology. This was about human endurance, surgical skill, and whether Ava could perform miracles fast enough to save everyone she'd promised to fight for. The 26-year-old patient, Sarah Chun, according to her hospital bracelet, lay unconscious on the operating table, her life measured in blood pressure readings and oxygen levels that painted an increasingly desperate picture. She's beautiful, one of the nurses murmured, noting the woman's engagement ring. Getting married in 2 months, according to the information from her emergency contact. Daniel watched Ava's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Personal details made patients human instead of medical cases, and human connections made the weight of responsibility almost unbearable. Let's focus on giving her that wedding, Ava said, making her first incision with hands that were absolutely steady despite the pressure. For the next 90 minutes, Daniel witnessed medical artistry. Ava moved through Sarah Chin's abdomen with precision that bordered on supernatural, finding bleeds that threatened life, repairing damage that seemed impossible to fix, working with the kind of focused intensity that made everything else in the world disappear. His software performed flawlessly, providing real-time imaging and monitoring that helped her make split-second decisions. But watching her work, Daniel understood that technology was just a tool. The real miracle was happening through her hands, her knowledge, her refusal to accept that some injuries couldn't be healed. Pressure's stabilizing, the anesthesiologist reported. Good. How's our 16-year-old? Ava asked without looking up from her work. Still stable, but Dr. Martinez is concerned about internal bleeding developing. He might not stay stable much longer. Daniel saw Ava's hands pause for a fraction of a second, the only sign that she'd heard the implicit pressure. Work faster, save this life quicker, so you could try to save the next one. Hurry up and be perfect. Almost done here, she murmured, completing repairs that would let Sarah Chun walk down an aisle instead of into a grave. But as they finished closing Sarah's incisions, an alarm screamed from the monitoring station. Patient 3 is crashing, someone called from the hallway. Blood pressure dropping, possible internal hemorrhage. The 16-year-old was dying while they saved someone else. Daniel watched Ava's face cycle through emotions, frustration, determination, the terrible calculation of medical triage. She'd saved Sarah Chen's life, but now another patient was paying the price for that decision. Or 3 is ready, a nurse reported. Let's move, Ava said, already stripping off surgical gloves and reaching for fresh ones. But as they rushed toward the next operating room, Daniel realized what was happening. Ava had been working for 6 straight hours, had just completed surgery that would have challenged a rested surgeon, and was now about to attempt another life-or-death procedure on a patient whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. Ava, he said quietly as they scrubbed in again, when's the last time you slept? Sleep is for people who don't have patients dying on their watch, she replied. But he caught the slight tremor in her hands as fatigue and pressure began taking their toll. In OR 3, 16-year-old Marcus Williams lay surrounded by machines that painted an increasingly desperate picture. His parents waited in the family conference room, holding each other and praying to whatever higher power might be listening that their son would come home alive. Talk to me, Ava said to the surgical team as they prepared for what might be their most difficult case of the night. Multiple internal injuries, possible liver laceration, blood loss significant but not yet critical, her resident reported. But as Ava made her first incision, the monitors began painting a different picture. The internal damage was worse than imaging had suggested, the bleeding more extensive, the repairs needed more complex than anyone had anticipated. This is going to take longer than expected, she said grimly. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limits? Forced to perform when exhaustion and pressure threatened to break you? What kept you going when everything in your body wanted to quit? Daniel watched from his monitoring station as Ava fought for Marcus Williams's life with the same intensity she'd brought to every previous case. But he could see exhaustion beginning to affect her normally precise movements, could see the weight of responsibility wearing down someone who'd already given everything she had. Dr. Thompson, her resident, said carefully, maybe we should consider bringing in Dr. Martinez to assist. I've got this, Ava replied, but her voice carried a note of determination that sounded more like desperation. That's when Daniel made a decision that could end his career or save 3 lives. He stepped away from his monitoring station and approached the surgical table. Ava, he said quietly, you've been working for 8 hours straight. You just performed a perfect surgery under impossible pressure. Maybe it's time to trust your team to help carry this load. She looked up at him, exhaustion and stubbornness warring in her dark eyes. I don't give up on patients, she said. I'm not asking you to give up. I'm asking you to let someone else help you save him. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the operating table while Marcus Williams's life hung in the balance. This was the test Daniel hadn't expected. Not whether he could support her success, but whether he could challenge her when her perfectionism threatened to become destructive. Dr. Martinez is standing by, the resident said carefully. Ava's hands stilled for a moment as she weighed pride against pragmatism, personal responsibility against patient outcomes. Get him in here, she decided finally. And prep patient 4. I heard there's another critical case coming in. As Dr. Martinez took over Marcus Williams's surgery with fresh hands and rested focus, Ava stepped back from the table. Daniel caught her arm as she swayed slightly, exhaustion finally demanding payment for hours of life-or-death concentration. You okay? He asked. I will be, she replied, after we save everyone who came in tonight. But as they left, OR 3, Daniel realized something had shifted between them. She'd listened to him, had trusted his judgment, even when it meant admitting she couldn't do everything alone. That wasn't professional partnership. That was something deeper, more personal, more dangerous. For hours later, all patients were stable. Sarah Chin would walk down the aisle in 2 months. The brain injury patient was expected to make a full recovery. Marcus Williams was out of surgery with a prognosis that would let him graduate high school and go to college. In the quiet aftermath of crisis, Daniel found Ava in her office, still in surgical scrubs, staring out the window at Houston's dawn skyline. You saved them all, he said. We save them all, she corrected. You were right about bringing in Dr. Martinez. My ego almost cost that kid his life. Daniel sat down across from her desk, noting the exhaustion in every line of her body. That wasn't ego. That was caring too much about people who trusted you to save them. Is there a difference? Yeah, Daniel said quietly. Ego is about being right. Caring is about getting the best outcome, even if it means admitting you need help. Ava looked at him with something like surprise, as if she was seeing a version of him that hadn't existed 5 years ago. You stayed, she said simply. Of course I stayed. Even when it got ugly, when patients were dying, when I was too stubborn to ask for help, you stayed. Daniel realized this had been the test she needed to see. Not whether he could handle success or public scrutiny, but whether he would abandon her when the pressure became overwhelming and the stakes turned life or death. I'm not going anywhere, Ava, he said. Not this time. For the first time in 5 years, she looked at him like she might actually believe it. After months of professional partnership and careful emotional distance, one moment of vulnerability finally breaks down the walls they've built. But healing old wounds requires more than just admitting you still love someone. 3 months after the mass casualty incident, Daniel and Ava had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Morning briefings in her office, software updates during lunch breaks, evening debriefs about surgical cases and technical improvements. Their partnership had become the kind of seamless collaboration that other departments envied. But they maintained careful boundaries, professional respect without personal intimacy, shared goals without shared space, partnership without the kind of closeness that had once made them inseparable. Until the night, everything changed. Daniel was reviewing code updates in the hospital's tech center when his phone buzzed with a text from Ava. Patient in or two asking for you specifically. Can you come up? He found her outside the operating room, still in scrubs, but with tears threatening to spill over her professional composure. Through the observation window, he could see a young girl, maybe 8 years old, lying unconscious on the surgical table. What's the case? Daniel asked gently. Emma Rodriguez, 8 years old, needs emergency heart surgery. Ava's voice was steady, but he caught the tremor underneath. She heard about the computer doctor who helps fix people, and she specifically asked if you'd be here to make sure her heart gets fixed properly. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest. A child he'd never met had asked for him, trusted him to help save her life. After years of building technology for profit, of measuring success in stock prices and market share, an 8-year-old had reminded him what his work was really about. Of course, he said. What do you need from me? Just be here, Ava replied. The surgery is complex, and she's scared. Her parents are scared. Everyone's scared. But she asked for you specifically, so I promised her you'd be watching over the computers that help Mama, Doctor, fix hearts. Mama Doctor. That's how the child saw Ava. Not as chief of surgery or medical genius, but as the maternal figure who made hurt things better. As they scrubbed in, Daniel noticed Ava's hands shaking slightly, something he'd never seen before, even during the most stressful procedures. You okay? He asked. She reminded me of my niece, Ava admitted quietly. Same age, same smile, same way of asking questions about everything. If this were Katie on that table. Her voice trailed off, but Daniel understood. Professional surgeons learn to maintain emotional distance from patients, but sometimes a case broke through those defenses and made everything personal. She's going to be fine, he said with more confidence than he felt. You're the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in Texas. What if I'm not good enough this time? The question came out in a whisper that revealed vulnerability she rarely showed. What if all my training, all my experience, all your technology, what if it's not enough to save her? Daniel stopped scrubbing and turned to face her. This was the fear that lived in every surgeon's heart. The possibility that despite everything you knew, everything you'd learned, everything you could do, sometimes medicine wasn't enough to win against death. Then we face it together, he said simply. But Ava, I've watched you perform miracles for months. I've seen you save people who shouldn't have survived. If anyone can bring Emma Rodriguez home to her family, it's you." For a moment, they stood in the scrub room's harsh fluorescent light, two people who'd loved each other, lost each other, and slowly found their way back to something that felt like partnership. But this moment, sharing fear about a child's life, felt more intimate than any of their carefully professional interactions. "I need to tell you something," Avis said suddenly. "What?" "Working with you again, seeing how you've changed, watching you care about patients instead of just profits. I've been trying to convince myself it was just professional respect." Daniel's heart started beating faster, but he forced himself to stay quiet and let her finish. "But the truth is, I don't just trust you as a colleague. I trust you with things that matter to me. Like Emma in there. Like my fear that sometimes being good isn't good enough." "Ava, I'm not finished," she said. "5 years ago, you left because you couldn't handle being with someone whose work mattered more than appearances. But tonight, you're here because a child asked for the computer doctor. You become someone who understands what I've always known, that some things are more important than what other people think." Daniel felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. She was offering something he thought was lost forever. Not just professional partnership, but personal trust. The chance to be someone she could depend on when things got scary. "Does this mean?" "It means we save Emma first," Ava said, pushing through the doors into or two. "Then we figure out what happens next." The surgery took 4.5 hours. Emma Rodriguez's heart defect was more complex than initial scans had suggested, requiring repairs that pushed both surgical skill and technology to their limits. Daniel watched his software track blood flow patterns while Ava worked with hands that held steady despite the fear he'd seen in the scrub room. "There," she said finally, completing the last suture. "Heart function looks good. She should make a full recovery." As monitors confirmed Emma's stable condition, the OR team released the collective breath they'd been holding. Another child would grow up, would learn to ride bikes and go to school and fall in love because skilled hands and advanced technology had worked together to fix what was broken. "She's going to be okay," Daniel said, relief flooding through him. "She's going to be perfect," Ava agreed, pulling off her surgical cap with shaking hands that finally allowed exhaustion and emotion to show. They were alone in the empty, or machines humming quietly around Emma's sleeping form, when Ava finally let herself feel the full weight of what they'd just accomplished. "I was terrified," she admitted. "The whole time, I kept thinking about her parents in the waiting room, about what I'd say if we couldn't save her, about how that little girl trusted me to fix her heart." "But you did fix it," Daniel said, moving closer. "You gave her a future." "We did," Ava corrected. "Your monitoring systems caught irregularities that saved us an hour of surgical time." This was teamwork at its best. They stood together in the quiet aftermath of crisis, two people who'd learned to work together, to trust each other, to share the weight of responsibility for other people's lives. "What happens now?" Daniel asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Ava stepped closer and kissed him. Not the desperate passion of people trying to recreate something lost, but the gentle intimacy of people who'd found something new. Her lips tasted like coffee and determination, like late nights spent saving lives and early mornings filled with purpose. When they broke apart, Emma Rodriguez slept peacefully between them, her small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a perfectly repaired heart. "What happens now," Ava said quietly, "is that we stop pretending this is just professional partnership and start figuring out what it means to love someone who's become exactly who you needed them to be." Have you ever realized that the person you thought you'd lost forever had actually become exactly who you needed them to become? That sometimes people don't change into what you expected, but into what you didn't know you were missing? Outside your windows, Houston's skyline glittered with the promise of morning. In the waiting room, Emma's parents would soon receive news that would let them breathe again. In her recovery room, a little girl would wake up with a heart strong enough to carry her through a full and happy life. And in the quiet space between professional partnership and personal possibility, two people who'd broken each other once began to explore whether healing was possible, not just for their patients, but for themselves. "So what happens tomorrow?" Daniel asked. "Tomorrow we show up," Ava replied, her hand finding his. We do the work. We save what we can. And we see if two people who got love wrong once can figure out how to get it right. It wasn't a declaration of eternal devotion or a promise that everything would be easy. It was something better. The commitment to try again, to trust again, to believe that some things broken could be healed if you had skilled hands and enough time. Sometimes the most important surgery isn't on a patient. It's on a relationship that needs careful reconstruction, steady hands, and the belief that love can survive even the deepest wounds. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the same hospital corridor where he'd first seen Ava again, but everything had changed. The nervous businessman who'd once stumbled through presentations while his ex-wife controlled the room had been replaced by someone who belonged here, not because he'd earned respect through wealth or connections, but because he'd learned to serve something larger than himself. "Mr. Carter?" A small voice made him turn. Emma Rodriguez, now 9 and fully recovered from her heart surgery, bounced down the hallway with the energy of a child whose biggest concern was whether the hospital cafeteria still served chocolate pudding. "Hey, Emma, what brings you back to our favorite place?" "Mama Doctor said I could visit if I brought my report card," Emma replied proudly, producing a paper covered in A's and gold stars. "And I wanted to see the computers that helped fix my heart." Daniel knelt down to her level, still amazed that this vibrant child had once lain motionless on an operating table while he and Ava fought to save her life. "Those are some impressive grades," he said, studying her report card. "What's your favorite subject?" "Science," Emma answered immediately. "I want to be a doctor like Mama Doctor when I grow up. But I want to learn about computers too, like you do. Maybe I can help fix hearts with both." The innocence of her dream, combining Ava's healing hands with his technical knowledge, made Daniel's chest tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. "I think that's a wonderful goal," he said seriously. "The world needs more people who understand both medicine and technology." "Will you teach me about computers?" Emma asked with a directness that only children possessed. "I'd be honored to," Daniel replied. "But first you have to promise me you'll keep getting those A's in science." "Deal." Emma sealed their agreement with a handshake that was surprisingly firm for someone so small. As Emma skipped away to find Ava, Daniel remained in the corridor, thinking about how drastically his definition of success had changed. 6 months ago, his greatest achievement had been building software that impressed investors. Today, his proudest moment was knowing that his technology had helped save a little girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor. "She's something else, isn't she?" Ava appeared beside him, watching Emma disappear around the corner with the confidence of someone who owned the world. "She's going to change medicine someday," Daniel said. "Probably revolutionize it completely. Just like someone else I know," Ava replied. And when he looked at her, her eyes held warmth that had nothing to do with professional respect. They'd been rebuilding their relationship carefully over the past months. Dinner conversations that lasted past midnight, walks through Houston's medical district where they'd first fallen in love, quiet moments stolen between surgeries and software updates. Not the desperate passion of people trying to recreate something lost, but the deeper intimacy of people discovering who they'd become. "How did the board meeting go?" Daniel asked as they walked toward her office. 3 new hospitals want to implement our surgical technology integration," Ava reported. Methodist Dallas, Presbyterian Houston, and surprisingly, Johns Hopkins called about a consultation. "Johns Hopkins," Daniel repeated, impressed despite himself. That's validation that what we've built together actually works," Ava finished. "Not just the technology, but the partnership model. Medical expertise combined with technical innovation, with equal respect for both contributions. Our technology, our partnership." The words that had once felt like generous charity now sounded like simple truth. They created something together that neither could have achieved alone. "There's something else," Ava continued, pulling a folder from her desk. "Dr. Martinez is retiring next year. The hospital wants to create a new position, Director of Medical Technology Integration. Someone who can oversee the merger of surgical expertise and digital innovation across all departments." Daniel looked at the job description she handed him, recognizing his own work reflected in requirements that would have seemed impossible a year ago. They want someone with both medical understanding and technical expertise, he said, scanning the qualifications. They want you, Ava corrected, but only if you're interested in staying in Houston permanently. The position requires full-time hospital affiliation, not consulting contracts. The offer represented everything he'd thought he wanted 5 years ago: professional recognition, financial security, the chance to build something lasting. But more than that, it meant belonging somewhere that valued purpose over profit, where success was measured in lives saved rather than revenue generated. What do you think? He asked. I think, Ava said carefully, that depends on whether you're ready to put down roots in a place where the work matters more than the recognition. It was a test, but not the kind that had once driven them apart. This time, she was asking if he'd found peace with being valued for contribution rather than status, with being part of something bigger rather than being in charge of something smaller. I'm ready, Daniel said without hesitation. Houston's home. This hospital is home. Working with you is home. The last statement hung between them, more personal than professional, loaded with implications they've been dancing around for months. Speaking of working together, Ava said, her voice shifting to something softer, there's something else we need to discuss. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the faint scent of antiseptic that had become as familiar as breathing. What's that? Whether this partnership includes the parts of our lives that happen outside these walls, she said. Whether we're ready to try being Daniel and Ava again, instead of just Mr. Carter and Dr. Thompson. Daniel felt his heart rate spike the way it always did when she challenged him to be braver than he felt. Are you asking me out, Dr. Thompson? I'm asking if you want to go home together tonight, she replied. To the same home. To see if two people who destroyed each other once can figure out how to heal each other instead. The word home carried weight that had nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with belonging somewhere, with someone, in a way that felt permanent and safe and worth protecting. Yes, Daniel said simply. I want that more than I've ever wanted anything. Ava smiled, not the professional expression she wore during board meetings, but the genuine joy he remembered from their first apartment, from Sunday mornings in bed, from the time before fear and insecurity had poisoned something beautiful. Then let's go home, she said, taking his hand with fingers that were steady from years of surgery and sure from months of rebuilding trust. As they left the hospital together, Daniel thought about Emma Rodriguez's dream of combining medicine and technology, about the job offer that would let him build something lasting, about the woman beside him who'd become exactly who he needed her to be by refusing to become anyone less than herself. Have you ever discovered that the thing you thought you'd lost forever was actually just waiting for you to become worthy of having it back? That sometimes the greatest healing happens not by trying to return to what was, but by building something entirely new from the pieces that remained? 6 months ago, walking into that boardroom had felt like facing judgment for crimes he'd committed against both their dreams. Today, walking out of the hospital with Ava's hand has felt like walking into a future he'd thought was lost forever. Not because they'd ignored the past or pretended it hadn't happened, but because they'd done the harder work of learning from it, growing beyond it, becoming people who could love each other better than they had before. So, what happens now? Daniel asked as they reached her car. Now we go home, Ava replied, keys jingling in the Houston twilight. We make dinner together. We talk about Emma's visit and your job offer and whether you think we're ready to adopt a dog. A dog? I've been thinking about it, she said with the kind of casual announcement that usually preceded major life changes. Something small and friendly that would be good with children when Emma comes to visit. The domestic normalcy of the conversation, jobs and dinner and pets, felt revolutionary after years of careful professional distance. They were talking about building a life together, not just working together. I like that, Daniel said. All of it. As they drove through Houston's evening traffic toward the apartment Ava had invited him to share, Daniel realized that revenge really was a dish best served cold. But sometimes the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Ava had gotten her revenge not by destroying the man who'd underestimated her, but by helping him become someone worthy of her respect. And sometimes if you were very lucky and willing to do the hard work of becoming better than you'd been, revenge could transform into something that looked remarkably like redemption. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly as they pulled into the parking garage of her building. "For what?" "For seeing who I could become instead of just punishing who I'd been." Ava turned off the engine and looked at him with eyes that held 5 years of pain and healing, months of careful rebuilding, and the kind of love that survived because it was strong enough to demand growth. "That's what real love does," she said simply. "It doesn't just accept you as you are. It challenges you to become who you're meant to be." As they rode the elevator to the floor that would become theirs, Daniel understood that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One where a surgeon and a programmer learned that the most important healing happened not in operating rooms or boardrooms, but in the quiet spaces where two imperfect people decided to try loving each other right. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway that led to a future neither had planned, but both had earned through the hard work of becoming worthy of second chances. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. But sometimes, if you're very fortunate, the best revenge is discovering that the person who hurt you was capable of growing into someone who could heal you instead. Welcome home, Dr. Thompson and Mr. Carter. Welcome to the life you built by learning to love better than you had before.